This is God's work. Now let's get down to business. What was Malcolm's motive? Let me tell you the arrangement that Malcolm and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad had, which maybe you may know about or may not know. If the Honorable Elijah Muhammad told Malcolm, I'm going to put you out front and make you known that you will make me known. What kind of deal is that? In the days of Moses, Jehovah was not known. Jehovah put Moses and Aaron out there so that they could become known, so that they could make Jehovah known. So Elijah Muhammad put Malcolm out front. Was Malcolm out front? It wasn't that we didn't have nobody else in the nation that could talk like Malcolm. Stand up, Brother Abdullah. Step out here. This brother was formerly known as John Shabazz from Los Angeles, California. He rivaled Malcolm in eloquence, in brilliance, and in his ability to captivate audiences. He had the fastest growing mosque in the Nation of Islam. We had ministers all over the country taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Some of them may not have been as eloquent as Malcolm, but he had many that were just as. I just wanted to say that Elijah Muhammad didn't just produce one Malcolm. He produced a whole cadre, and every one that he taught was a powerhouse in his own right, in his own city. Malcolm was just the out front man. So whenever we went to Harvard or Yale or Howard and we all were around Malcolm, none of us would speak. Malcolm spoke for us. We were quiet. The press would say, well, what do you think? We say, speak to the spokesman. We had that kind of discipline. So when they couldn't get a word out of us, they got it from Malcolm, so they elevated Malcolm. That was the plan. Elevate Malcolm, the articulate spokesman of the wisdom of Elijah Muhammad. And Malcolm was supposed to become a big man and introduce the world to the man that taught him and made him. It was a good arrangement. But what was the government doing all this time? Do you think the government liked the Nation of Islam? Do you think the government liked Malcolm? When Malcolm stood up representing the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, that was an unbeatable duo. Did you see how the enemy writes the FBI files, that they worked night and day to divide Malcolm from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad? What tactics did they use? Part of the tactics was to keep Malcolm in the press as the leader, to incite jealousy among those of us who followed Elijah Muhammad and knew that Malcolm was not the leader. We never followed Malcolm. We were followers of Malcolm to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. But the press, Malcolm X and his Muslims, they kept pumping Malcolm up as the leader. And then Malcolm had to almost degrade himself to keep from being looked at as the leader. So Malcolm would say, I'm like Charlie McCarthy. Some of you young people don't know who Charlie McCarthy is, but the older ones know that Charlie McCarthy was a wooden dummy, and Edgar Bergen was the ventriloquist that manipulated Charlie McCarthy. So Malcolm would go in front of the public and really degrade himself by saying, I'm like Charlie McCarthy, and Elijah Muhammad is like Edgar Bergen, meaning he is the one pulling my strings. And he was not lying. Every major speech that Malcolm made, he would go to the phone and call the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad would give him the outline. Malcolm would fill it in, and the press would marvel, and you would marvel at the wisdom of that man. But he was a microphone speaking the wisdom of a man speaking through him. You were benefiting from Malcolm, but you were benefiting from Elijah Muhammad through Malcolm. You don't like that, do you? I'm sorry, man. I can't tell you no lie. Because that's all you getting from me is a benefit from Elijah Muhammad through me. I'm not the author of this. But you all love to worship the students and crush the master. Something about Elijah Muhammad that you just don't seem to like. He was a strange man, uncompromising, unbending. They called him a strict disciplinarian, and he was that. He didn't like foolishness, and we couldn't carry on no foolishness around him. Wonderful teacher. Well, when Malcolm was the big man, I was like a little imitation, I would say, of Malcolm X on the East Coast. Everybody that knew me knew that I loved Malcolm and knew that I taught a lot like Malcolm because I adored him. And if you see the film clips of Malcolm, you'll see me somewhere sitting, cheering Malcolm. And then sometimes you see me looking at the rooftops and looking because I was a soldier. And I would have given my life to stop a bullet for Malcolm because he, to me, was the greatest representative of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. What happened? What happened? Now, this is a difficult part. But sometimes, Brother Ayman, that's the oldest son of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in our audience, those around the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and sometimes even members of the family, didn't always understand why the Honorable Elijah Muhammad did the things that he did. Now, this was a simple thing. This is my sister, Tainetta Muhammad. Would you come out, Sister Tainetta? I'm going to give an incident in our Islamic life to illustrate a purpose. Now, I happened to see Sister Muhammad when she became a Muslim in 1958, February the 28th, in Detroit, Michigan. I was present. Sister Tainetta Muhammad has a love for art, for culture, for music. But her greatest love is Allah and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Word. So she would take this word and form it into plays. And since I was in show business, I took the word and formed it into music and drama. So one day, I came to see the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and he said, "Brother, did you write that play, or did you take it from Sister Tainetta Muhammad's play, The Night of the Storm?" I said, "Sir, I don't know anything about the play." He said, "Well, don't worry about it. We'll straighten it all out tonight at dinner." At dinner that night, it was Sister Clara Muhammad, Brother Wallace D. Muhammad, Raymond Sharif, John Ali, Ethel Sharif. They were all around the table. We had gotten finished the soup. Usually the messenger would let you drink the soup. And if there was a case that he wanted to get on, he'd at least let you get the soup down. So you wouldn't go out the door totally hungry. Sister Muhammad, you can go and sit down. Thank you. But I'm making a point. That night, Elijah Muhammad said to me, he had his handkerchief in his hand, he said, "Brother, You did take this play from the sister, didn't you? I said, no, sir, dear apostle. He said, brother, you did take it. Malcolm saw that play and came and told you about it, and then you wrote yours, didn't you? I said, no, sir, dear apostle, I didn't take her play. Now, this time I'm really getting upset because I'm innocent. And Sister Clara Muhammad saw him beating on me, and she wanted to come to my defense. And he said he said he didn't take it. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, in a stern way, said, Clara, I'm handling this. So she became very quiet. And for the next 10 minutes, he proceeded to beat me and beat. You did take it. And then he would give scenarios of how I took it. So now I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I can't be going back and forth with him, arguing with him. That don't look right. You arguing with your teacher, even if you're defending yourself from a false accusation. I didn't know what to do. I said, I know he don't want me to lie. So I said, well, dear apostle, I did exactly what you say I did. I put it back on him. He took his handkerchief, he threw it down. He said, well, all right then. Then when things quieted down, my head is almost in the soup. He looked at me and said, brother, I was defending you all the time. Now, in my mind, I said, what kind of defense was that? He was accusing me of what my detractors who may have been around that table were saying about me. So he took up their charges and hurled their charges at me. He said, brother, I was waiting for you to say that you wrote your play in 1956. She didn't come in the nation till 1958. How could you have taken yours from her? I was waiting for you to accuse her of stealing her play from you. So I said, well, I couldn't accuse her because we both came under your teaching. We didn't know anything about John Hawkins' history until you taught us. So if we wrote a play, we wrote it based on your knowledge. So really, the play is yours. And he looked around the table as if to say, you see? Then later, as I was going out the door, he looked at me and said, you and my son Wallace go and mop up the wilderness. He was testing me. And then years later, he said to me, if you really want to see what's in a person, accuse them of something that you know they're not guilty of with a straight face and keep it going. And before long, what's really in them will come out. Now, why would the messenger do that? He wants to know what's sitting up in you because you're going to be elevated. And if there's something negative sitting up in you that you're hiding under the right pressure, like cooking a pot, you'll see what the smell is if you cook it. So Elijah Muhammad is no fool. He tested Malcolm. He tested me. He tested his son. He tested his daughter. Did he test you, brother? Did he test you, Jabril? Did he test you, Sister Tynetta? Did anybody ever come to Elijah Muhammad and was not tried? Well, did he try Malcolm? How did he try Malcolm? And what was his purpose in trying Malcolm? I want you to listen because this is very important. Everybody said Malcolm was the heir apparent. You know what that means? That when Elijah Muhammad was no longer present, Malcolm would sit in his seat. Do you know what kind of character you got to have to sit in the seat of a redeemer? One mission to save a people. Do you know what kind of bearing and patience you got to have to sit in that kind of seat? When Master Farad Muhammad told Elijah Muhammad, take plenty, you're going to suffer from your people. You can't be vindictive and sit in the seat of Elijah Muhammad. You got to take the suffering and roll with the punches until you can resurrect God in the person that is buried under the rubbish of this world's life. You can't be a low character man and sit in the seat of Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm, being the quote unquote heir apparent, had to be tested more than anybody else. Because if Elijah Muhammad departed from among us, Malcolm would be the one that everybody would look to for leadership. Now, how do you test a man like that? Inside his own house. When you go to the dojo, how many know what a dojo is? My God. How many know what a gymnasium is? Oh, thank you. A dojo is a place where you go to learn the martial arts. How many of you have any knowledge of martial arts? Would you raise your hands? You do? Okay. The sensei or the master who is teaching you, how does he prepare you for combat? He takes you to the threshold of pain, doesn't he? And when you get to your threshold and you can't take no more, you hit your leg, let him know, hey, don't go no further. Then the next time you go back, he increases your threshold. How many of you have lifted weights? You know that when you're doing repetitions, you're breaking down the muscle fiber in order to build it up. So every time you call on it to go one more, even when you think you can't, go one more, lift it again, lift it one more time. You're breaking it down, but the next time you can take a lot more because that's the way you train. How do you train a man who's going to sit in the seat of a redeemer of a people? How do you train him? In every organization, in every church, where there are black or white people, there's always envy and jealousy present. There's not one of you in this audience who has accomplished anything in this life that hasn't been met with the envy and enmity and jealousy of some of your peers and others who see you progressing in the face of their not being able to make as much progress. And isn't it painful to have people that you grew up with, that you love, turn on you because you have some advantage that they want for themselves but don't have? Isn't it painful to have somebody turn on you because of a gift that God has given you? Please, this is very important, very important. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, the three most hated men are: one, the person who is wealthy and gives away his wealth to the poor; two, the person who is wise and teaches wisdom to the ignorant; and third, the man to whom the Holy Quran is revealed. The three most hated men. The person to whom the Holy Quran is revealed is the most hated of all because he's wealthy, he's wise, and he shares his wealth and his wisdom with his people. So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was the most hated black man among us. Talk to me. In the 60s, when we were in the civil rights struggle, was Stokely Carmichael hated more than Elijah Muhammad? Kwame Ture now. Was Whitney Young, James Farmer, James Foreman, Martin Luther King hated more than Elijah Muhammad? No. Elijah Muhammad was the most hated of all because Elijah Muhammad was the wisest of all, and he shared his wisdom with fools like me, and he made us wise. So the white man kept seeing more strength coming after him because Elijah Muhammad was not a man of show. He was a man who made men. With all due respect to my brother and friend, the Reverend Jackson, how many little Reverend Jacksons has he produced? And how many little Martin Luther Kings did Martin Luther King produce? And which one of Martin Luther King's disciples are carrying on Martin Luther King's work today as Martin Luther King demanded? Talk to me. Elijah Muhammad knew that every living thing must die. And he was looking for us way on into the future, so he prepared ministers and teachers and persons who would lead. And if Malcolm was going to sit in the seat of a most hated and envied man, Malcolm would have to be able to withstand the insults, the arrows, the darts, poisoned with envy and slander and backbiting and evil words. And he must not strike out at them because he is to redeem them. And as long as they didn't make a physical attack against us, we didn't care what you say. But if you made a physical attack, then we'll give you all of the business you need. And that is the way it was, and that's the way it is in 1993. We're not going to bother nobody, but if anybody attempts to bother us, we'll give you all the hell that hell can take with the backing of Almighty God. Make no mistake about that. Hold on, all praise is due to Allah. Now, I'm coming to the critical part of this lecture. Among the Panthers, among the NAACP, the Urban League, and Maulana Karenga's group called Us on the West Coast, and among the Nation of Islam, there were agents of the FBI. And you know what? They're among us today. They say, Assalamu alaikum. They never kind of get it right. The best agents, they get it real right. Because their aim is to get up in the mosque and get into the secretarial department where the facts and the figures are. Their aim is to get into positions of leadership. And their aim is to watch the leaders for any weaknesses, so that they can bring about tensions and disruption in organization. Because the white man don't want to see black folk organize. Well, you know that J. Edgar Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover You know, J. Edgar. He had plants everywhere. J. Edgar Hoover hated Martin Luther King, and J. Edgar Hoover hated Malcolm X, Kwame Ture, or Stokely Carmichael. He hated the civil rights movement. And while Martin Luther King and the big six in civil rights were sitting in Washington with Lyndon Baines Johnson, and even with John Kennedy, they were planning the death of Martin Luther King Jr. Jesse sat at my table. We had coffee together. I said, Reverend Jackson, you're in some very powerful circles, and I know you hear a lot of things. And I'm sure they're telling you things about how they're going to move on Farrakhan. I said, but I just want to remind you, my dear brother, that while they were talking about moving on Malcolm and Elijah, they were already planning the death of Martin Luther King. I said, they don't trust you, Jesse. I said, no matter how close you get, Reverend Jackson, they know they can't trust you because there's too much God in you. You'll only go so far, and then the God in you will yank you back. So I said, they will never give you what you think you deserve. My words have proved true. Malcolm, our great spokesman, in 1963 was beating the dickens out of John Kennedy. John Fitzgerald, Malcolm called him John the Fox, because the liberals had gotten control of the black struggle. And guess what? 30 years ago, Malcolm was the #1 anti-Semite, according to the Anti-Defamation League, in the black struggle. Wait now, you didn't hear me, did you? I'm going to say that again. 30 years ago, Malcolm X, according to the Anti-Defamation League and the dossiers that they put out on Malcolm, was the #1 anti-Semite among black people. And you know why they called him anti-Semitic? Because it was Malcolm X who exposed the liberal Jewish conspiracy behind the civil rights movement. Do you know who the first person was to bring to us the protocols of the learned elders of Zion? Fact or fiction, whatever it is, Malcolm brought it to us. And do you know who the first person was to expose that the real leader of the NAACP was a Jew? It was Malcolm X. And the real leader of the NAACP, even though they had blacks out front, it was Spingarn. And the real leader, Core and SNCC in the civil rights movement, they were Jews. Now, why did the Jews hook up with you? I mean, this is not anti-Semitism, this is just fact. Why did the Jews hook up with you? Why aren't they hooked up with you too tough today? Because the purpose was accomplished. They got with you because you were discriminated against, right? So were Jews. So it was a natural alliance. They picketed with you, but their motive was different. We're going back to the intent now. Why did they picket? Because they knew once you broke the doors down, you weren't in a position to take advantage of it, but they were. So when the doors were broken down in the civil rights movement, the Jews walked in, took over Miami Beach. Talk to me. Jews got more political power, more economic power as a result of the civil rights struggle. Gays came to prominence, women came to prominence, and blacks are still singing, "We shall overcome." Is that right? Don't be mad with me. Don't be angry. That's not anti-Semitic. I don't hate Jews. I just know the truth. Now, Malcolm was busting the civil rights movement. Malcolm was knocking Dr. King because Elijah Muhammad, his teacher, was knocking Dr. King. What? Yes. Elijah Muhammad looked at Martin Luther King as one of the #1 magicians of Pharaoh. What? And wait, let's not get emotional. Please, sisters, don't get angry. Martin Luther King was a PhD in theology. If you know anything about the prophecies do not talk